Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Um, I am Sandra Buckles. I am the PR and development person at Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. It has been a goal of mine to make sure that we are sharing awareness and spreading information that I think that people need to know, particularly in this instance where we're going to talk about juvenile sentencing and reform. So you might notice a lot of things that are going on um, in your own communities throughout Maryland and elsewhere, where things just don't make sense. So we're going to try to see if we can make them make sense and just bring awareness to juvenile sentencing and reform. Joining me today is our executive director, Kurt Wolfgang, our deputy director, Joanna Mupanduki, and our guest from Gonzales Research and Media Services, Patrick Gonzales. Thank you guys all for joining us for this important topic. Let's, I guess, go around, and if you guys have like a couple sentences that you want to start off with, then we'll do that, and then we'll hop right into the questions. Kurt?
Okay, thank you very much. As Sandra said, I'm Kurt Wolfgang, the executive director, and been around this place for 42 years in one capacity or another. One of the worst, most horrific trends over that period of time has been the manner in which we treat serious juvenile offenses, and that is the topic that we're going to take up today. I am so thankful and grateful to have found a new friend, a great guy, Patrick Gonzales, who is a pollster, among other things, but is joining us today, and I appreciate his time and effort to be here with us today.
I'm Patrick Gonzales. I've been in the polling research business in Maryland for about 40 years. So I've been actively involved in the politics of Maryland for that time on a professional level. And so I've witnessed the kind of evolution of not only politics, but our culture, and just really became aware of this issue in the law from 2021 within the past year. And so I have a great interest in it. I've done a little research on it, and I look forward very much to discussing it today.
Thanks, Patrick. Joanna?
And good afternoon. I'm Joanna Mupanduki, and I'm the Deputy Director here at MCVRC. I'm new to the Deputy Director role, but I was a victim rights attorney with MCVRC for 3 years. I also have a background in prosecution in the state of Maryland, as well as the states of California and Washington, for over 7.5, going on 8 years, and then also worked for the government as well. But I'm excited. I think this is an important topic to be discussing. I think when I spoke with victims of crime and represented them, they were always surprised and shocked at the state of juvenile law and how it would affect them. And so it's important to raise this issue and let people know what the current state of the law is and the recent changes that have been made.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joanna. And for those of you that tune in regularly, you might want to get used to seeing Joanna on camera, because she might be joining us more often than not. You'll hear in our conversation, Kurt is really doing a lot of things legislatively and working on some cases, and he's punting some of these topics over to Joanna. So it'll be great. It'll be great. I guess
she's smarter anyway, so it works out.
So let's get into the history of juvenile sentencing. So this is where you're going to really tell that I'm not an attorney or a judge or a lawyer or any of those things, because I'm just going to break it down the way that I think it is, and then you guys are going to correct me. So that's the name of this game. So from what I understand, juveniles back in the day were able to be charged as adults if they committed a heinous crime. So one of those examples is what happened to our founder's daughter, where she was abducted, repeatedly raped, tortured, murdered, and a series of other things. And one of the guys that did it was an adult and the other was a juvenile. But back then, you could be charged as an adult for crimes as a child as young as 8.
Yes.
correct. Well, the assumption was that any child could be charged with a crime, but there was an assumption that a child under 8 was not able to understand what was going on and to be charged. But it
Okay.
could be
And
overcome.
so being charged as an adult means that they could receive life without parole. So just breaking down that life is life, right? Because I think that sometimes normal people think that life is 20 years. And that's not what we're talking about, right?
Correct.
Well, a life sentence is really difficult to define in Maryland. We don't know how long someone's going to spend. And so you spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out what their time to parole eligibility is, just to see what the minimum possibility would be. And even that is very debatable. The chairman of the parole commission recently said 10 years. We have used for the last 40 years the figure 11 years and 7 months. At one point in time,
Regardless of the age of the.
yes, if you are tried as an adult, the sentences are the same regardless of whether you were a juvenile at the time of the commission of the crime. In other words, the potential sentences are the same. So if you receive a life sentence and you were 17 or 16 or 15 at the time that the crime was committed, then that's the same life sentence that than an adult would get. Built into some of the new Maryland laws is the ability to have that sentence reviewed later on because of your youthful age at the time the offense took place. But a life sentence means the same if you were 16 or 17 at the time that you committed the crime. And that basically is parole eligibility, a parole possibility somewhere between 10 and 11 years after the offense occurs. Now, historically, there weren't many lifers released that early, that quickly, but that's all changing rapidly, very
Right.
rapidly.
We'll get into some of those changes. I just wanted to make sure that the baseline that we understand is that when juveniles are sentenced to life, when juveniles are sentenced as an adult, that they can get it. One of the reasons is so that they can get life without parole, and life is natural life, and without parole means you're just not getting out, right, in their lifetime. That's what it was supposed to mean historically.
Let me add a little bit to say that a life without parole is no longer available in Maryland for juvenile offenders. You know, that, I'm sorry, I guess I'm skipping your script a little bit.
You are.
That,
It's okay.
that bill took place in 2021, I think.
Yep, we're going there next. So we can go into, so back in the day, life without parole was life without parole. And even if you're a juvenile, if you committed a heinous crime, you're going to jail for good, and you should not expect to see daylight in your natural life. 2021 comes around, and there's something called the Juvenile Restoration Act. And that allowed for juveniles to no longer be given life without parole. And it allowed for them to request resentencing after serving 20 years. And it was any child over the age of 8 that was affected.
Yeah, all of that's correct. I'm not sure what you mean by the child over the age of 8.
Because that was still the age at that time, right? Like you still had to be over the age of 8.
Yes. Now I understand what you mean. Yes, all of that is correct.
So that happened, and it allowed for resentencing, which means that what happened to us, from what I understand, just being here working at MCVRC, is that not only did it affect current cases that were brand new, but it also affected people that were currently incarcerated, that they could ask for a resentencing, correct?
Well, that's the 20-year provision that you were talking about. After being incarcerated for 20 years, if you were convicted as an adult for a crime when you were a juvenile, you can, it's not just ask for a resentence. You are entitled to a resentencing. And the judge can't even deny a resentencing process. You must be allowed to have a resentencing. And that really creates a number of problems for, and especially for victims, but also for justice. The judge who originally heard the case is gone. Likely the prosecutor's gone. Likely the police who worked on the case are gone. And very possibly the victim's family, the survivor, it could be a rape type case, or it could be a murder type case, or a combination, of course. But regardless, the victim may not be around. The victim's family may not be around to be heard anymore in the process. So when this convict essentially is given the ability to demand a new sentencing process, that new sentencing process will be held very likely in front of a new judge who never heard the case before and doesn't know the facts. And the only entity who is there in a good situation to retell the story is the defendant, who's going to retell the story the way they want it told, to a new, more sympathetic ear, meaning the judge who did not have to sit through the horrors of the trial in the first place.
Right. So it definitely has a new environment, and then comes 2022, which is the Juvenile Reform Act. I'm gonna just read this, and then we can go into a discussion, because I feel like this is going to be where some thoughts are going to be coming out. But the Juvenile Reform Act of 2022 was just recently passed, and the notes that I wrote were: the court must consider 16 factors to determine whether a child will have an opportunity to be restored, to be charged as an adult. And they changed the minimum age to 13. So that means that children under the age of 13 cannot be charged with any crime. And you would have to be 16 or over to be charged with a violent crime. It also reduces the amount of time that a child can be on probation. A misdemeanor, they would be on probation for 6 months, and a felony, they would be on probation for 1 year.
Yeah, so one correction to all of that, and that is when you say have to be 16 or over to be charged with a violent crime, that would be 16 or over to be charged as an adult with a violent crime.
Okay.
But there's a court case that happened in 2021 that almost completely negates the ability to try any juvenile as an adult anyway. So that also comes into play. That wasn't a legislative change. That was a judicial change.
Well, and I can speak to that. The judicial case that came out was speaking about the opportunities that a juvenile had to reform. And so basically, if you had a juvenile who had not been in the juvenile system prior to, committing a homicide, then they would be considered to not have had an opportunity to be reformed. And so then they would just say, well, of course he has to be charged as a juvenile, which means that he's going to have minimal probation. The probation can be extended, but once again, it's never past the age of 21. And so if you have a 17-year-old who has no prior contact with the juvenile justice system, commits a homicide, the most he's looking at is 4 years of incarceration. And most likely it's going to be far less than that, because most of the programs in the prison systems, are 6 months to a year and not longer.
So I feel like it's super loaded right now, but I wanted to talk about what seems to be happening. So one of the things, and I've referred to this before on a different Lunch and Learn, is that where I live, our sheriff's office shares photos and stories on their social media that kind of brings attention to these things happened, but the kids were sent home because of their age. Like that is literally what it says on their post. And what that's done is it's raised awareness in our community in the county that I live in, because people are like, wait, why are they being sent home? They just, molested this girl or whatever at school. Because I think one of the stories was a girl was at school and some boys touched her and nothing happened. And that was because they were like, oh, whatever. And so they shared it in that way. So it's raising awareness in a very kind of grassroots kind of organic way, where they're sharing information and it's really making the community aware, because I don't think that people would be aware that these changes happen if it weren't for that sharing, which is one reason why we wanted to do this post on juvenile reform. But what initiated these changes to the juvenile sentencing?
Well, of course, looking at it, if you step back and look at it from the very historic view, in the 1940s sometime, Maryland didn't have a juvenile court system at all, a separate set of rules and that sort of thing. Now, I'm confident, I don't know this for a fact, I wasn't there, but I'm confident that if you were 15 years old and you committed a crime and you were tried in the same system, but I suspect that the judge would treat you a little bit differently when you're 15 years old than you would have been treated if you were an adult. But along comes the juvenile justice system, and of course that was, I don't want to call it a fad, but it was something that swept the nation. The concept that we need a separate way of treating juveniles, and that essentially was based on the concept of trying to make sure that these were they were the most likely people getting into the system who could be changed and rehabilitated, and maybe were doing things because of the environment they came up in. So along comes the juvenile system, but it was never created or intended to address serious crimes. In the very beginning, violent offenses were not even eligible to be tried in the juvenile court. And that changed slightly over time, so that there became a system where if you were charged as a juvenile, the prosecutor might be able to ask the court to point out that this is a more serious situation. It needs to be transferred to the adult court, or vice versa. If you were charged for a serious offense in the adult court, that the court might want to take a look at whether you, in particular circumstances, would be better off tried as a juvenile. And I know that one of the things that they looked at over the years was your mental age in that process. Those who were under some sort of a mental disability or incapacity would be more likely to be waived down from an adult trial to a juvenile trial. So those things became possible over the years. The focus was that we should be trying to be more humane, if you will, with juvenile offenders, and that rehabilitation ought to be our primary focus. That has gone on and gone on. It seems like to extremes, to the point that the focus has become exclusively what is best to rehabilitate this person and nothing else. And that includes that recent court case that Joanna and I mentioned, that turned the whole concept of trying juveniles as adults for serious crimes on its head, and basically set as the sole determining factor what's best for the juvenile, not what's best for society or what's best to make society safe.
So I feel like there were so many things there. Just trying to wrap my head around. I had a question and then another one popped up right after that. So I think that my biggest thing is this is a system that's assuming that everyone can be rehabilitated and released.
Well, certainly that everyone must be treated that way who's in the juvenile system, and of course beyond that, this advancing the age to 13 that you can even be tried as a juvenile, charged as a juvenile, makes the assumption that kids will be kids, including, and sadly enough, the way that has worked out, including violent offenses. Now, I can't name you a murder case that's happened since then, but I suspect there has been one, and you wouldn't hear about it because you might read in the newspaper that someone was murdered, but if they brought in a 12-year-old for murder, they would attempt to conceal from you the fact that a 12-year-old was even brought in for the murder, unless you get to what you talked about, and that is some of the law enforcement agencies around the state have realized the insanity of this, and they have started publishing to the public the stories of who they bring in for what crime and who they release. One of the ones that I see that hits a nerve every time is when someone under the age of 13 brings a loaded gun to school. Now, we all don't want a massacre at a school, and yet the word is out. That's another part of this that's frightening, and that is people who have ill intent, whether they're 13 or 12 or 11, think about these things and use these rules and decisions and laws to their advantage. And so they realize that there are juveniles across this state who realize they are home free. If they're under 13, they can commit any offense they want. And I suspect that it's even to the point where if they are 12 and getting on to 13, it might encourage them to commit whatever offense they want to commit before they do turn 13, so that they will not be held responsible for it.
And that is one of the cases that we had in Montgomery County. Is that the one that you're referring to anyway?
Well, no, the Montgomery County case that we had was a 14-year-old perpetrator and a 17-year-old perpetrator.
Okay.
It's one of the most heartbreaking cases that I have seen in 42 years of doing this. And that is the two brothers. I don't remember their ages. I think
Sandra, one was 20 and the other one was 14-ish, somewhere in there.
Okay. So they are in a public park up in Montgomery County, playing basketball, minding their own business. And apparently that was gang territory. And there's no allegation that the victims in this thing knew any of the gang members or were involved in any kind of gang activity. They were there to play basketball. And so along come the gang members, and this is gang turf. So they're going to show these people who are out on their basketball court that they're not allowed to be there. So they shoot them, four of them, not just these two, but these two were brothers. One died. One of the brothers died. The other one was permanently injured. The other two were seriously injured, but recovered, as I recall. Initially, they were charged as adults, and that is in accordance with the law of Maryland. But now you apply that 2021 case that came from the Maryland appeals courts that says the sole purpose of the court system is to determine what's best for those offenders in terms of the ability to rehabilitate them. And when you use that as the criteria, they're going to always be charged as juveniles. They were charged as juveniles. They were put into programs, to my understanding, that lasted 9 months, and then they were released after a murder, after shooting 4 people. And to add insult to injury, if you go on to YouTube and you know what to look for, you can find their fellow gang members celebrating the murder and the release of their friends, taunting the name of the murder victim in their rap song that they posted on YouTube.
Yeah, that is the one that I think sticks in my head, because they purposely had like the younger person be the one that was shooting. And I think that, that's kind of what you hear about, is these younger and younger people. And so we're at this place now. And Kurt was randomly, I think, listening to, how did you find this survey, Kurt? Let's get Patrick in here. But
listening to the radio one day, and I heard this wonderful news on the radio, on the new radio news.
So if you guys are not familiar with Kurt, he will randomly have an idea, and then he gets on like this little like side, it's like a side mission. Like if you're playing a video game, there's like a little side mission. And so his side mission was, oh, I found this survey. This is what it was. Go find it. So go ahead, Kurt.
That's right. The staff here did a great job of tracking down. I think one of our people contacted the radio station, or maybe did it through the internet, but found the story about the survey, found some names, and we were able to contact the genius behind the survey. And immediately, Patrick Gonzales sent us a copy of the survey and has talked to us about all of the details. And it's a great opportunity to look at something that we don't really do within this organization, and that is, we think we know what the pulse of the public is on our subjects. Patrick Gonzales knows what the pulse of the public is.
Well, the genius could not make it, so he sent me. And while I do not believe we live a preordained life here on this glorious earth, I do believe God brings people together every now and then for a certain reason. And I think that is part of what's in play here with Kurt. Last fall, along the same vein of what you've been talking about, most specifically, changing the age of a juvenile, upping it to 13, we asked Maryland voters, and let me just real quick kind of modify one of Kurt's statements. He said, a fad that has swept the nation. I would say a fad that has swept a segment of the nation, and I would submit a rather small segment. Anyway, last fall, we asked the question in this vein to Maryland voters: do you agree or disagree that a 12-year-old who takes a loaded gun to school should be charged as an adult? Because it was occurring quite frequently at the time we were conducting the survey. And what we found among Maryland voters is that 66% agree that these 12-year-olds should be charged as an adult, and 31% disagree. So, and we've asked similar questions. We asked, do you agree or disagree that the possession of a stolen firearm should be a felony, because in Maryland, I think it's one of 3 or 4 states across the nation where it's only a misdemeanor. 88% in this most recent poll we just did think it should be a felony. So what we have here, again, it's not a fad that swept the nation. It's a fad that has swept the minds of certain politicians for whatever their political reasons are. But in this last survey we did back in October, we really wanted to try to get a handle on the issue of a general philosophical approach. And we asked the question of Maryland voters from the perspective of how best to help the juvenile that is committing this crime. So we asked, in order to help these troubled youths, what is the best approach? Strict laws which hold the individuals accountable and responsible, or lenient laws which recognize that society is to blame for most of this behavior? And what we found again was 59% of Marylanders said strict laws, 35% said lenient laws. And it broke out a little by party. Republicans and independents overwhelmingly favored strict laws. Among Democrats, it was 47% strict laws, 48% lenient laws. But here was the most fascinating finding within the survey. Among Democrats, again, 47 strict, 48 lenient. When we looked at it by race, 62% of white Democrats wanted lenient laws, and 62% of African American Democrats wanted strict laws holding these children, these juveniles, whatever euphemism people want to call. These are people committing heinous crimes. They wanted them to be held accountable. And I would argue, not to hog up the conversation, I would argue that fundamentally most Black Democrats are in urban areas. They are living this in the street, whereas many of the white Democrats are sitting up in their ivory towers deciding what's best for all of us. So we will see.
It's interesting that you should say that, Patrick. We have discussed your survey among we now have 17 attorneys in the organization and 9 professional victim advocates. And we've had discussions about your surveys and the findings. And one of the very intelligent questions that was put by one of the attorneys was, I wonder how this breaks down in terms of where they live as opposed to just by their race. In other words, if you tested the where each person lived, would it change the statistics? In other words, would it bear out that where they live makes the big difference as opposed to their race?
And that's a good question. And what we do when we do a survey of Maryland voters, typically it's a sample of 800 designed to represent the state. And we break it out geographically. And we have 5 regions, one of which is Baltimore City. And what you find, Baltimore City is overwhelmingly Democratic. So whatever the overall Democrat result is, the Baltimore City number kind of mirrors it. But what we found in that question about the strict lenient was that Baltimore City, and it's only 8% of the state, so it wasn't a huge sample, but it was for comparative purposes, it was big enough. Baltimore City, in that case, more closely reflected the Republican view and the independent view than the Democratic view. Because again, white Democrats, the largest concentration of which are probably in Montgomery County, because it's the largest jurisdiction. It's overwhelmingly Democrat. And So it was just kind of interesting. But no, you're absolutely right. Where urban areas that are suffering the most, I suppose the politicians think they're trying to help, but I don't think they are. And I don't know. It's I have found in my personal experience in my life, my secret to success, and I only speak for me, was the day I said, Patrick, it's time to take responsibility for your life. And once I did that, once I said to myself, you know what, life is hard. And once I kind of grasped that concept in my heart, you know what, it got easier. So I don't know.
So Patrick, what prompted you to ask the specific questions that are in this survey?
Well, the honest answer is I have friends in the world of politics, and we've been talking about it. And one of my friends is a rather well-known individual whose own brother was murdered in Baltimore City within the last 10 or 15 years. So he's got a particular interest on the topic. I kind of typically am tied into what's happening in the legislature. So this issue has come to the fore the last couple of years. So it's sort of a confluence of those different things. And again, on a personal level, while I've never experienced certainly any kind of tragedy along the lines of what we're talking about here, it's something that means a great deal to me. And so that's kind of what's the impetus of asking those questions.
Thank you so much for that. And just to let our watchers know at home, some of the questions that Patrick asked in his poll, one of them had to do with the question about a question about a child being charged. This is where Kurt's example was a 12-year-old taking a loaded gun to school. Could they be charged criminally? Is one of the first ones. Another one was on strict versus lenient laws. And then this one that I actually have pulled up right now is currently in Maryland, juveniles between the ages 14 and 17 who commit murder or rape can be charged as adults. Would you support or oppose? I know, Patrick, you said you didn't like this question. Would you oppose changing the law so that they cannot be charged as adults? So 14 to 17, murder or rape, should they be charged as adults? And right now they can be. And I think that part of that is there was another survey, which I know that we dug down a while ago. It had to do with the brain development question and age, which I think is the sticking point for a lot of the arguments about not yet being developed or knowing right from wrong and things like that. So, so this kind of falls opposite of that, where most people oppose.
Yeah, not to interrupt, Sandra,
go ahead.
but the bottom line is 57% of Marylanders think that they shouldn't have changed the law. They think that these juveniles, should be held accountable and charged. So in other words, those behind the changing of the law in 2022, 21, whenever it was, making it to 13, are out of sync with about 60% of Marylanders. And politicians being who they are, and I have a lot of respect for someone who's willing to take that on, but they will do what they can as long as they can. And ultimately, it's up to the voters. And I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but we live in a country ultimately where we have control. And the voters in these statewide, but they're going to have to decide. And I'm not sloughing responsibility. I'm certainly willing to talk about it anytime. But if you care about something, then ultimately some sort of action is going to be necessary. And the number one action will be to vote out of office those that are so out of sync with the state.
And I think that's
Let me-
part of where we come into play, where, we, in our discussions earlier today, we're always going to be on the side of the victim. We want to make sure that we are really following the mission of our organization and making sure that we're behind them and we're supporting them. And when they feel re-victimized due to the justice system or something going on, it's so important for us to turn that into action. And one of the things that we can do is raise awareness like we are today. And so, we definitely appreciate, the information that you've provided, very quantitative measures that we can look at and refer to, particularly just in Maryland. I mean, to not put us in the same group as everywhere else, because, we're our own entity here. And even between Baltimore and DC, we are very melting pot here. And the way that we deal with things, has to be specific to our area. But I guess there's two other things that I wanted to get into. Number one is something that we had talked about before, and I think, Kurt, I got the information from you a while ago, but it had to do with the difference between the court systems and the programs that are available in detention centers. Because even though a juvenile is charged as an adult, they're still serving in a juvenile facility, right?
They are they're not in the same juvenile facility as someone who was charged and tried as a juvenile,
Okay.
but they are completely segregated from the older population. I believe that is in accordance with a federal statute. You cannot mix people under the age of 18 in with people over the age of 18, and in fact, that is one of the origins of the big hoop-de-doo about people coming across the border and being separated from their children. It is considered a safety matter to not have juveniles exposed to adults in detention, and therefore they have to be separate.
So based on how you answered me, so let me just try to wrap my head around this. So there's the juvenile system and kids that are being charged as juveniles, like for shoplifting or whatever it is that is, non-heinous crimes, right? And
Right.
they're juveniles and they are going to Boys Village or whatever, term you want to use for that, a juvenile facility. And then those programs that are available to them are juvenile programs and probably very reform focused, maybe some mental health things about, right and wrong and whatever. If they're charged as adults, then they have access to a different range of programs that are available in the adult facility. Is that?
They do essentially, let's take a 15-year-old who is tried as an adult. And what happens to him is he is relegated to the Division of Corrections, but they have a special facility where that individual stays until he's age 18. And then at age 18, he can be placed elsewhere in the general adult population to serve out the rest of his sentence. I am not the expert on what programs are available in that below age 18 facility. I believe it is in the complex of detention centers that are located in the Jessup area, but I don't know much more about that process. I can tell you that there is a youth. I am on a advisory board for Patuxent Institution, and they have a youth program at Patuxent. But the youth program at Patuxent is, for the same reasons, limited to those who have reached the age of 18. They would be people who were tried as adults, who were below the age of 18 at the time the crime was committed, but Patuxent can't accept them into their program until they're 18. then they put them in the special youth program at Patuxent. So there are things available to those who are tried as adults. I mean, one of the most egregious things about that 2021 court case that supposedly was for the benefit of the juveniles in making the determination that the court, when they're doing these hearings to determine whether the individual should be tried as an adult or a juvenile, has to use the one guiding star, and that is what's better, what it has the better potential to rehabilitate this juvenile. So I scratch my head at all of this, because where are you going to have a better opportunity to rehabilitate someone? Where you hold them for 9 months, where you are going to release them without the possibility of being reincarcerated if they violate terms and conditions of parole, where essentially when they turn 18, there's no more consequences to be had, and nobody even knows that they committed an offense, or in the adult system where you can work on them for 10 years or 15 or 20 or 30 years to rehabilitate them, as opposed to 9 months, where if they are released on some sort of program and they don't, there's a negative incentive to them misbehaving again. That negative incentive is the ability to lock them up and have them serve the rest of their sentence that they've been released from. You don't have any of that in the juvenile system.
Thanks for that. I definitely would be interested in learning more about the programs that are available in the juvenile versus adult systems. I think that is interesting that they're different. And I believe that we had a brief conversation about it, but it was probably years ago at this point. So thanks for sharing that information, Kurt. And what are we looking at for 2024 as far as juvenile reform? Is there anything that we should be aware of that's coming down the pike as far as legislation?
There are a number of good bills that are trying to swing the pendulum back. The governor has a bill in, for example, and forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have quite the details, but I know one of the things that he's trying to do is to at least modify this below the age of 13 business, where you can't be charged for anything, even as a juvenile, for offenses committed below the age of 13. That's one of the provisions. I know there are a number of other bills that are similar to that. But at the same time, the bills that go too far continue.
Is that House Bill 814 and 740, Senate Bill 744?
You're talking about the governor's bill?
Yeah.
I believe that's the number, yes. Yeah. At the same time, there are bills, once again, trying to go too far. There is a bill, for example, right now in the legislature to do away with the criminal offense of a child deliberately disrupting the school process. I assume from reading the bill and reading the article that would include, for example, a kid who pulls the fire alarm. It may even include, well, I don't think it would include that, but any sort of disruptive process, there is a deliberate disruption on the part of the child that goes to an extreme, can be charged as a criminal offense. They're trying to do away with that. And once again, I think it's taking a tool out of the toolbox to deal with deliberately destructive behavior under the assumption that this is all sort of a medical model. In other words, there's something that's causing this behavior that has nothing, that's correctable. And rather than just looking at the problems that it creates without resort to trying to solve the underlying offense. In other words, the first step is making sure that everybody's safe and that the environment is sane and normal. But instead, they don't want to do that. They want to try to focus on the what possibly caused this individual to go astray. And believe me, I'm curious and interested, and I want to help individuals as well. But the first thing you have to do, I love a quote from thousands of years ago from the Greek philosopher Cicero, and that quote is, "Let the public safety be the highest law." And it simply puts it, it's all of those other things are of interest, and maybe there's a way to address them, but the way to address them is not by overdoing the leniency that you show towards people who engage in disruptive behavior. It's not fair to the rest of society.
Thanks, Kurt. All right. Well, we are getting shorter on time here, so I guess Patrick, anything you're working on right now, or should we be following you somewhere, or tell us how we can find more information from you?
Oh, wait a minute. Let me jump in right there. That's a good place. That is the latest. Patrick has been very kind to us. He has included us in his survey results on a regular basis now. And the latest one that came out the question that caught my eye did not have anything to do with juveniles, but what it does have to do with is legislators and legislation being out of touch with the public, and maybe also with the public being out of touch with what's going on.
Public out of touch with themselves.
They don't know what's going on in the court system, and if they did, there would be a much more serious response from the public.
And talking what Kurt just mentioned about being kind of out of touch is both ends, because again, we followed up that felony possession, which is still only a misdemeanor. It boggles my mind that the legislature in Maryland has not yet made it a felony when 90% of Marylanders, that's across the board, that's Democrat, Republican, it's white, it's black, it's Republican, Democrat, it's young, it's old, it's Protestant, Episcopalian, it's across the board, agree. And 3/4 of that 90% is 74% strongly agree. Now, another question we asked on this recent poll was, do you support or oppose anyone convicted of selling drugs laced with fentanyl to a minimum of 10 years in prison if that drug resulted in a death? And what we found, 83% of Marylanders support a mandatory minimum sentence of at least 10 years for anyone convicted of selling drugs laced with fentanyl when the drug resulted in a death. And again, that was across the board. The intensity was greater than 2/3. That 83% was 68% strongly support. But again, whether you were Democrat, whether you're Republican, whether you're independent, whether you're born after 9/11 or first lit prior to Pearl Harbor, and everyone in between, agree. So again, this is a legislative body that I think on many levels does good things. But it seems to, with this issue, they are so out of sync with where Marylanders are. And I come back. Politicians will do what they can get away with as long as they can get away with it. And in their minds, getting away with it is getting reelected. And until the citizens, and this is where the citizens are out of sync. The citizens, 90% want this, yet they allow it to continue on the other side. So that's my little soapbox speech.
Well, I got on mine earlier. I guess, got to allow you to get on a little soapbox as well. We definitely appreciate it, Patrick, and I look forward to receiving other polls and surveys from you. If other people are interested, is there a somewhere where people can look for your polls, or do they just need to search?
Well, I was born in the 1800s. I do have a website, but I haven't looked at it in many years. So the best thing is I'm not sure what the best thing is Google Gonzales Research Maryland Poll. And there's always somebody that's more technologically savvy than I am that have all my polls linked. And so I got
well, thank you so much, Patrick. We definitely appreciate it. And, I think it's so important to have those quantitative numbers and statistics to support, what we were thinking anyway. So we definitely appreciate it. Closing remarks, we've got about 4 minutes left.
Yeah, Patrick has given us the permission, by the way, to use his poll results any way we want to put in our social media and that sort of thing. Very, very generous and kind, and we appreciate it very much.
I definitely can share a link on that with this survey on our social media. All right, closing remarks, Kurt.
I am so glad to see the pendulum swinging back, but there's a lot of work to be done, and there are a lot of consciousnesses to be raised on these issues. We've only scratched the surface of the horrors that exist within the system, and in the juvenile justice system, some of it is more horrific than any other place you'll find in the criminal justice system. And just as Patrick said, the public is so important to all of this. We, as a small organization trying to stand up for crime victims, do what we can do, but we need your help in doing that in any number of different ways. You can help us. We don't have time to talk about how at this point, but read our newsletter and stay in touch with us, particularly if you are a victim of crime. Stay in touch with us. We would like to be able, in the right circumstances, to bring you down to Annapolis and have you tell your story to these legislators who need to hear it. It makes a huge difference. We go down there and testify, and that is powerful, but it's nowhere near as powerful as carrying down an actual victim who says, this is what happened to me, and this is why you shouldn't pass this bill, or you should pass this bill. And what Patrick is doing and sharing with us gives us new tools to bring home the truth to the legislature, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kurt. Joanna?
Thank you. Yes, I just would agree that this is an important issue. We're happy to be able to bring this to people's attention because it's really hard as a victims' rights attorney to tell a family that there's nothing else that the judge can do legally in the case other than try to send somebody to a reform, system, that program that will be very brief. There's no, very real punishment when they've lost a person and their family. And so it's a very difficult situation, and one that people are just not aware of what the actual consequences are, because I think that when people are aware of how lenient the results are, they are very saddened by that and would certainly disagree with that.
Thanks, Joanna. All right, I guess that is it for now. If you are not, like Kurt said, if you're not on our newsletter, you can go to our website to subscribe to our newsletter. Our next newsletter will come out on the last Sunday of the month. You can click any of those links. I'll make sure to include a link both to this recording and also to Patrick's survey. And you'll have that in your repository if you want to take action. We definitely urge you to be active with us. If you're in a place where you can share your story, we welcome you to join us. If you're not yet in that place, we are not forcing anyone to be outside of their comfort zone in this manner. Just keep your finger on the pulse. We're working on it, and we're working to make sure that we're educating people on the things that are going on and things that we find are important for our clients and throughout Maryland and the state, and the nation as a whole. So thank you so much, and join us next time. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.